Early morning at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York. The radiant June sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows, making the crystal chandeliers from the ceiling sparkle. The grand ballroom, where preparations were underway for what the social press had dubbed the event of the year, was filled with a bustling atmosphere. Staff members dressed in charcoal gray uniforms of Carter Enterprises moved in rhythm, wiping every detail of the tables draped in white silk cloths, inspecting each vase of roses imported from the Netherlands, and ensuring that not a single speck of dust dared settle on the gleaming hardwood floors. At the center of this perfection stood Michelle Carter, an elegant black American woman clad in a navy Chanel suit, quietly observing her team. None of the VIP guests about to arrive could have guessed that the woman standing behind a massive flower arrangement with neatly tied natural curls was the CEO of Carter Enterprises, and more than that, the pregnant ex-wife of the groom, James Whitmore. James Whitmore, a 45-year-old white American businessman who was once a rising finance star, was now CEO of Whitmore Industries, a multi-billion-dollar media and technology conglomerate. Today, he was preparing to marry Elizabeth Harrington, a noble-born heiress of the prestigious Harrington family. This wedding was not merely a union of love, or at least what the public had been led to believe. It was a social statement, a meticulously orchestrated event to solidify James's standing among Manhattan's elite. Tabloids had endlessly covered Elizabeth's 10-carat diamond ring, the guest list featuring politicians, billionaires, and Hollywood stars. Yet, not a single word was written about Michelle Carter, the woman who once stood at the center of James's life, until he bluntly declared she was not worthy of his ambitions. Michelle stood behind a massive arrangement of white flowers, her hands clasped tightly to hide their trembling. She hadn't come here for revenge, or at least that's what she told herself. Carter Enterprises had been hired to ensure the ceremony went off without a hitch, at triple the usual fee, a contract Michelle personally accepted, drawn in by fate's irresistible irony. But as she gazed through the forest of white orchids and sparkling crystal branches, watching James enter the ballroom with his familiar, confident stride, her heart still ached. He remained tall, his black hair now streaked with silver at the temples, his sharp blue eyes sweeping the room like a king surveying his domain. Beside him stood Elizabeth, tall, slender, golden-haired, with the poised arrogance of someone who had never known hardship. She spoke to the event planner, her voice soft but sharp, asking for the silver candle arrangements to be repositioned. Michelle took a deep breath, reminding herself she was no longer the abandoned woman of 15 years ago. She was Michelle Carter, CEO of a $200 million facilities management empire, a woman who had turned $2,000 and a one-way plane ticket into a success story that earned Boston's respect. But the memory of that day, the day James placed an envelope containing cash and a plane ticket on the dinner table, saying she and the baby in her womb would ruin the trajectory of his career, remained as sharp as a blade. She had learned to hide her pain, but today it surged not from regret, but from a hunger for justice. The Carter Enterprises team operated like a perfectly programmed machine. They were women, mostly black or single mothers, personally selected and trained by Michelle, since her early days scrubbing office floors at night. They understood the value of precision, of pushing past society's skeptical gaze. A young staffer, Maya, approached Michelle, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Carter, we've completed the crystal chandelier cleaning. Would you like to recheck the VIP table section?" Michelle nodded, her gaze still locked on James, who was instructing a photographer on framing. "Well done, Maya. Make sure everything is perfect. This client is very demanding." Suddenly, the ballroom doors swung open, and a young girl walked in, holding a tablet. Olivia, Michelle's 14-year-old daughter, with curls like her mother's and sharp eyes inherited from her father, had arrived earlier than expected. She was supposed to be in a quantum physics research program at Columbia University. Panic surged in Michelle's chest. Olivia should not be here, not now. But Olivia, exuding her signature confidence, walked straight to her mother and spoke calmly. "Mom, I checked the hotel's server network and found a strange folder on the groom's laptop. It's labeled Chicago. It contains dozens of photos of you from 15 years ago." The entire room seemed to stop breathing. James turned around, locking eyes with Michelle, then shifted his gaze to Olivia. Recognition hit him like an electric shock. His face turned pale, fists clenched, as though trying to grip a reality that was slipping away. Sensing the tension, Elizabeth approached, her brows furrowed. "James, what's going on? Who are these people?" Her voice remained polite, but a razor of suspicion was beneath it. Michelle stepped out from behind the flowers, composed like a CEO leading a high-stakes meeting. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm Michelle Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises, the company overseeing this wedding. And this is my daughter, Olivia." She paused, eyes locking on James, her voice calm but steely. "Daughter of James Whitmore." Gasps rippled through the crowd of staff and event organizers. Elizabeth turned to James, her blue eyes wide. "What is she talking about, James?" Her voice had gone cold, like betrayal revealed in front of hundreds. James tried to speak, but could only manage a strangled sound. Olivia, unwavering, raised the tablet. "I have a DNA test result from 3 years ago. The paternity match is 99.9997%. Mr. Whitmore is my father. He knew my mother was pregnant when he left her in Chicago." Elizabeth pulled off the diamond ring and placed it into James's trembling palm. "Call it off," she said firmly before turning away. Her powerful parents, the pillars of the Harrington dynasty, rushed to follow. Murmurs stirred among the guests, while the paparazzi cameras peeked in from the entrance. James stood alone in the opulent room, his eyes dazed like a man who had lost everything. Michelle remained composed. The hotel manager, quietly standing nearby, handed her an envelope. "Mrs. Carter, here is the confidential document you requested." She nodded and handed the envelope to James. "You should take a look at this. Last week, Carter Holdings, my subsidiary, acquired 51% of Whitmore Industries. Your board wasn't pleased with your recent decisions, and they accepted my offer." James opened the envelope with trembling hands. The figures and signatures confirmed his worst nightmare. The empire he built now belonged to the woman he once dismissed. "Michelle, how did you do this?" His voice cracked, stripped of all the confidence of a CEO. Michelle offered a faint smile, not out of triumph, but the peace of someone who had survived it all. "James, you once told me I'd be nothing without you. You're the one who became nothing, without the heart you threw away." Olivia stood beside her mother, her eyes emotionless as she looked at the father she had just met. At that moment, within the magnificent ballroom, a story of betrayal, resilience, and justice unfolded, promising a journey full of emotion and revelation. In the opulent Four Seasons ballroom, as James Whitmore stood frozen, his hand gripping the envelope containing the news of his empire's collapse, Michelle Carter felt memories flood back like a wave. Just moments earlier, she had confronted her ex-husband, the man who once declared she would never be anything without him. Now, amid the chaos of a canceled wedding, Michelle allowed her mind to drift back 15 years to a cold January night in Chicago, when her world was still filled with hope and love. 18 months before that day, Michelle, a 28-year-old black literature teacher, had walked into a different ballroom, not as a CEO, but as a volunteer at a charity fundraiser for literacy programs. With her curly hair tied up and a simple blue dress, she meticulously arranged stacks of books on a display table, her hands quick and sure, her eyes shining passionately. Having grown up in a poor neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where books were a luxury, Michelle believed literature could open new horizons. That belief had brought her to this event, and that very passion caught the eye of James Whitmore. James entered the room as if he owned it. Tall, with sleek black hair and piercing blue eyes, he wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried the confident air of a rising financial analyst. A Wall Street investment firm had just recruited him, and Chicago was merely a stepping stone before conquering Manhattan. His deep, compelling voice captured every gaze when he spoke to the crowd of donors about investment strategies. He declared that the future belongs to those who seize the opportunity, and his eyes, by chance, locked with Michelle's, who stood quietly in the corner. A spark, intangible but undeniable, flickered in the air. By the end of the evening, champagne glass in hand, James approached Michelle. He said, "You're different from everyone here," his smile lighting up the room. "You care about what you're doing, not just putting on a show." Accustomed to suspicious stares due to her skin color and background, Michelle was caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. They talked for hours about favorite books and dreams. Hers was to open a community library, and he was to build a financial empire. That night, James asked for her number, and a week later, they had dinner at an upscale restaurant along the Chicago River. Their love blazed fast like wildfire. With his charm and ambition, James made Michelle feel like she was living in a dream. He brought her flowers, took her to concerts, and spoke of a future where they would take on New York together. 3 months later, he proposed in a snow-covered park, kneeling with a simple silver ring filled with meaning. "Together, we'll create something extraordinary," he whispered as she nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. They married in a small ceremony with only a few close friends. As James said, "We'll have the grand wedding once we get to New York." But the dream soon shattered. James was promoted, but the role required him to remain in Chicago longer to prove himself before relocating to Wall Street. Out of love and trust, Michelle gave up her teaching position at a prestigious private school to follow him. She accepted part-time teaching jobs at community colleges, while James worked day and night, building his reputation with near-ruthless determination. He began to change. The morning kisses disappeared, and their conversations shrank to short remarks about work. Michelle felt the growing distance, but kept telling herself it was only temporary pressure. One January evening, as snow blanketed Chicago, Michelle stood inside the small apartment James called a temporary residence. She had spent the day cleaning, cooking his favorite beef Wellington, and placing fresh daisies on the dinner table. She carried 3 pregnancy tests in her coat pocket, all showing 2 clear blue lines. Her heart pounded with a mix of joy and anxiety. James had once said children weren't part of his 5-year plan, but Michelle believed their love was strong enough to change that. When James walked in, snow clinging to his charcoal overcoat, he set his Italian leather briefcase on the table, not glancing at her. "The meeting ended early," he said flatly. The Moscow deal progressed faster than expected. Michelle smiled, trying to mask her nerves. "I made your favorite dish and opened that Bordeaux you've been saving. I need to talk to you about something important." James finally looked at her, but his gaze was cold, void of warmth. "Can it wait? I need to review the numbers for tomorrow morning's call." "No, it can't wait," Michelle replied, her voice firmer than expected. She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." Silence engulfed the room, colder than the storm outside. James stood still, his eyes scanning from her face to her stomach and back. "How far along?" he asked, his tone clinical, like a doctor. About 6 weeks, Michelle replied, clinging to hope. I know we said we'd wait, but… James interrupted. This doesn't work for me, his voice calm, terrifyingly so. A child will derail my career trajectory, and clearly, you don't understand what it means to be married to someone like me. Michelle felt as if she had been slapped. Someone like you? She asked, voice trembling. James turned his eyes like blades. Someone with ambition, with a plan. I've just been offered a promotion in New York. I'm leaving in 3 days. Michelle's heart raced, but she clung to hope. That's amazing. When do we move? I can start looking for teaching positions. You're not coming with me, James said flatly, with no emotion. This promotion doesn't include family baggage. Michelle's world tilted. She gripped the chair to keep from falling. Divorce? James, we're having a baby. No. He corrected that you are having a baby as if discussing a failed investment. I'm building an empire. James opened his briefcase, pulled out a manila envelope, and placed it on the table next to the carefully arranged daisies. My attorney has already prepared the divorce documents in my name. You have 72 hours to leave. Tears welled up in Michelle's eyes, but she kept her voice steady. What about the baby? James pulled out a one-way plane ticket to Boston and another envelope. $2,000. More than generous. Boston has good schools. You can find a job. $2,000 to disappear? Michelle asked, her pain slowly turning into anger. James adjusted his tie, a gesture she knew meant he was done with the conversation. You'll never be anything without me, Michelle. You're too ordinary for the future I'm building. Those words, sharp as razors, slashed through her pride. James walked out, leaving Michelle alone in the cold apartment, one hand on her stomach, where their child was growing. That night, Michelle sat on the bed, staring at snow-covered Chicago. She thought of her mother, a black woman who had raised her in poverty, once telling her, strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. Those words became her only light in the darkness. Michelle clutched the plane ticket, not as an escape, but as a challenge. She would go to Boston, not to hide, but to rebuild. James might think she was ordinary, but she would prove him wrong, not for revenge, but for herself and the child growing inside her. Snow fell heavily over the streets of Boston, blanketing the narrow alleys of the Dorchester neighborhood in pure white. Carrying 2 worn-out suitcases, Michelle Carter stepped out of a yellow taxi in front of a dilapidated 3-story building. The bitter January wind sliced through her thin coat, which was far from warm enough, but she kept her posture straight, one hand instinctively placed on her belly, where the child she shared with James Whitmore was growing. Just 3 days ago, she had stood in their Chicago apartment, facing James's cruel betrayal, the husband who declared she was too ordinary and tossed her $2,000 and a one-way plane ticket to disappear. Now, Boston was her only chance to start again, but it was already proving to be a harsher challenge than she had ever imagined. The taxi driver grunted $26, his skeptical eyes scanning her suitcases and exhausted face. Given her current situation, Michelle handed over $30, a foolish act of generosity, but old habits died hard. The driver didn't bother to help with her luggage, leaving her to struggle up the cracked concrete steps with the bags alone. The landlady, Mrs. Rosa, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, stood waiting at the door. "You're Carter?" she asked, eyeing Michelle from head to toe, pausing at her still flat stomach and bare ring finger. "Job?" she continued, voice thick with suspicion. "I'm a teacher," Michelle replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the judgment in Mrs. Rosa's eyes. "I'll be applying for jobs this week." Mrs. Rosa raised an eyebrow. "No job right now? Where's the deposit?" Swallowing her pride, Michelle took $900 from her pocket. nearly half of what James had left her, and said, "I can pay 3 months up front in cash." Mrs. Rosa's gaze softened slightly, but her tone remained stern. "No parties, no men coming and going. I run a decent place." Michelle nodded, struggling not to cry. "It's just me," she said quietly but firmly. The room, hardly a proper apartment, was less than 200 square feet. A single bed with a sagging mattress, a small electric stove, and a cramped sink took up most of the space. The shared bathroom was at the end of the hall and was used by 3 other tenants. After Mrs. Rosa left, Michelle sat on the edge of the bed and let her tears fall silently. She placed her hands on her belly and whispered, "It's just you and me, baby. But I promise, we'll be okay." As fragile as it was, that promise became the only fire keeping her steady. The next morning, morning sickness hit like a storm. Michelle knelt on the cold tile floor of the shared bathroom, vomiting violently, while trying to stay silent so as not to disturb the other tenants. A line had formed outside in the hallway, and when she stepped out, pale-faced, a security guard muttered, "Some of us have jobs to get to." Michelle apologized, hurrying back to her room to change into her only professional outfit. A navy blue dress now slightly loose after stress, and nausea had caused her to lose weight. The administrative office of Boston Public Schools buzzed with people. Michelle sat waiting, clutching her job application file, her eyes glancing at the potential colleagues around her, none of whom seemed to notice the presence of a pregnant black woman with no family in this unfamiliar city. "Ms. Carter," a weary voice called. "We have some substitute teaching positions available," the staffer said, "but no full-time openings until fall. You'll need a Massachusetts certification for a permanent position." Michelle nodded, hiding her disappointment. "I'll take any substitute role and begin the certification process immediately." The staffer looked at her left hand, noting the absence of a ring. "Substitute teachers don't receive health benefits until they're officially hired." The implication was clear. Being pregnant without insurance was a financial disaster. Michelle forced a strained smile, her voice calm. "I understand. When can I start?" Inside, she reminded herself that every small step, no matter how difficult, was a brick toward her future. That evening, Michelle walked through downtown Boston, stepping into every office building that didn't require a security pass. At the reception desk of a small accounting firm, she hesitantly asked, "Does your company need an evening cleaner?" The receptionist, a young woman, looked at Michelle's professional dress in surprise. "I thought you were here for an office interview." Michelle gave a faint smile. "I'm trying to get by until I land a teaching position." By the end of the weekend, she had secured 3 evening cleaning jobs and had been added to the substitute teacher lists at 5 schools. Michelle's life turned into a relentless routine. Each morning, she woke at 5 a.m., rushing to the bathroom before the hallway line formed, masking her nausea with running water. By 6:30, she was ready, waiting by the phone for school assignments. She walked across the city on days without class, applying for jobs at schools, libraries, and even coffee shops. In the evenings, she scrubbed office floors on her knees, her hands raw from cleaning chemicals, her back aching from pregnancy. Under the fluorescent lights of deserted buildings, she counted each dollar she earned, carefully logging everything in a small notebook labeled "Future" on the cover. One Friday night, after her cleaning shift, Michelle sat on her bed and counted $189 earned that week. "Not enough," she whispered to the child in her belly, "but it's a start." She pulled an old card from her suitcase, one from her mother, who had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. In shaky handwriting it read, "Strength isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up." Michelle clutched this card, feeling as though her mother were right there with her, reminding her that even though Boston was cold, she could still rise even though the weight of society's judgment was heavy. Not for James. Not to prove him wrong, but for herself and the child she was carrying. The judgmental looks from her landlady, co-workers, or clients weren't just because she was pregnant, but because of her skin color. As a black woman in Dorchester, Michelle knew she had to work twice as hard to be recognized. But each look, each whispered comment, only fueled her resolve. She wouldn't just survive, but build a life she could be proud of. With its harsh streets and hidden opportunities, Boston would be where she turned pain into power. It laid the emotional groundwork for her transformation, from a victim to a leader. Torrential rain poured down the dark streets of Dorchester, Boston. On an October night in 2005, Michelle Carter, clutching 2-month-old Olivia wrapped in a thin blanket, stepped through the door of a women's shelter. Her cleaning uniform was soaked through, her curly hair matted to her forehead, but her eyes still burned with an unyielding determination. Just hours earlier, a bright red eviction notice had been slapped onto the door of her tiny rented room, marking the collapse of 8 months of relentless effort. But as she looked down at Olivia's peaceful face, fast asleep in her arms, Michelle felt a new strength, one to survive and overcome. The journey to this moment began during her first days in Boston, when Michelle, a pregnant black woman, faced the bitter January cold and society's skeptical stares. She had worked non-stop, substitute teaching by day, cleaning offices at night, to save every penny for her unborn child. But pregnancy made everything harder. The waves of morning sickness drained her strength. Cleaning contracts dwindled as her belly grew, and office managers' judging glances reminded her that a pregnant black woman was unwelcome in places demanding a professional image. In August 2005, Olivia Carter was born at Boston Medical Hospital on a stifling, humid night. Michelle arrived at the hospital in a taxi, still wearing her cleaning uniform, when contractions started during her evening shift. "Where's the father?" the nurse asked, pen hovering over the intake form. Michelle hesitated, then answered, "He passed away before he knew he was going to be a father." That bitter lie was easier than the truth, that James Whitmore, her ex-husband, had abandoned her upon learning she was pregnant, declaring that she and the baby were baggage blocking his empire. Saying she was a widow drew sympathy, while the truth only invited questions and judgment. After 14 hours of labor, Olivia entered the world. Her cry rang out like a declaration of life beneath the cold lights of the delivery room. When the nurse placed the baby in Michelle's arms, a fierce emotion rose within her. Not just love, but a sacred promise. Olivia, with her wide, round eyes and tiny clenched fists, was the reason Michelle would never collapse again. "Hello, my little warrior," she whispered, counting each perfect finger and toe. "We're going to conquer the world together." But reality proved far harsher than those whispered vows. Returning to her cramped rental room, Michelle was met with towering medical bills and rent she could barely manage. She kept working, leaving Olivia in a second-hand crib bought from a charity shop while she cleaned offices or taught. But by October, even after cutting every expense, living on bread, wearing a tattered coat to save money, she still couldn't pay rent. The eviction notice was the final blow, forcing her to turn to the shelter, a place she had once sworn she would never set foot in. The shelter counselor, Lena, had tired but warm eyes. She led Michelle into a communal room with 8 beds, each a haven for a woman carrying her own painful story. Lena said gently that you and your baby can stay here for 3 weeks. We'll help you find a new place. Michelle nodded, but inside, she knew she couldn't rely on anyone but herself. She placed Olivia into a makeshift crib, listening to the rain hammering against the window, and the quiet breathing of the other women around her. The cramped space, the musty smell, and the faint crying of a child in the corner trapped her in a nightmare. But when Michelle's eyes fell on Olivia, sleeping with her tiny lips pressed together, something shifted within her. Despair slowly gave way to a resolve harder than a diamond. She remembered what James had once said, "You'll never be anything without me." Those words, once a wound, now became fuel. Michelle knelt beside the crib, took her daughter's hand, and whispered, "I swear to you, Olivia, James will swallow every word he says one day. I'll turn every ounce of scorn into strength, every drop of pain into resolve. And when I do, the world will know your worth, mine." That vow wasn't just a promise to Olivia, but a commitment to herself. Michelle didn't just want to survive. She wanted to build a life worthy of pride, not just for her daughter, but to prove that a black woman, abandoned and broke, could still create something miraculous. She thought of her mother, who had raised her in poverty, always teaching that society's prejudice was just noise. The authentic voice was the one inside. That vow in the shelter marked the moment Michelle chose not to let the past define her future. The next morning, while Olivia slept in her crib, Michelle met with Lena to ask for directions to a nearby cafe. With her last $50, money meant for diapers and milk, she printed 200 business cards at a coffee shop. Carter Cleaning Services, cleaning that makes a difference. The simple phrase carried deep meaning. Carter, her maiden name, became a symbol of rebirth. Holding those crisp white cards in her hand, Michelle couldn't have imagined that they would be the first step toward building a multi-million-dollar empire, and that one day they would make James Whitmore bow his head. The shelter, with its peeling walls and painful stories, was not an ending. It was a beginning. Every skeptical stare, every door slammed in her face, only sharpened Michelle's vow. Olivia, the tiny baby sleeping soundly, was the flame lighting the path ahead. A path full of thorns, but also full of promise. The dim light of a winter morning filtered through the only window of the women's shelter in Dorchester, casting a soft glow on the sleeping face of baby Olivia, 2 months old, lying in a makeshift crib. Michelle Carter, her curly hair tied neatly back and her eyes shining with fierce determination, sat at a small table in the corner of the communal room. In front of her lay a stack of freshly printed business cards. The words, "Carter Cleaning Services. Cleaning that makes a difference," boldly printed on a simple white background. With her last $50, money meant for diapers and formula, Michelle had wagered everything on this idea. It wasn't just a job. It was a declaration that she, a black woman abandoned by her husband, would rewrite her story. Michelle had faced some of her darkest days in the weeks leading up to this moment. After being evicted from her tiny rental, she and Olivia turned to the shelter, where stories of abandonment and suffering echoed through the cramped walls like a sorrowful choir. Yet Michelle made her vow to turn James Whitmore's scorn into strength within this confined space, accompanied by rain against the window and her daughter's steady breathing. James had once said, "You'll never be anything without me," and those words had now become fuel. Carter Cleaning Services was not just a company. It was Michelle's rebirth, reclaiming her maiden name as proof that she didn't need James to succeed. Every morning, Michelle rose at 4 a.m. before the other women in the shelter were awake. She changed into her cleaning uniform, wrapped Olivia in a handmade sling across her chest, and began her day by cold calling small offices, shops, and apartment buildings around Boston. "I offer reliable, affordable cleaning services," she would say, her voice steady with the same confidence she once used to teach literature at a private school in Chicago. But behind her professionalism were wary eyes, not only because she was a single mother, but because of her skin color. "Do you have a license?" one manager asked skeptically. I'm in the process of completing it, Michelle replied, knowing full well it was a fee she couldn't yet afford. Her first break came from a small dental clinic in Brookline. The manager, Mrs. Clara, noticed Olivia sleeping in the sling across Michelle's chest when she arrived to give a quote. Do you bring your child to business meetings? Mrs. Clara frowned. Michelle smiled, unfazed. My babysitter canceled today, but I always keep my commitments. When I'm on the job, my daughter is well cared for. Mrs. Clara, once a single mother herself, softened. She said I understood juggling everything and signed on for weekly cleaning. Michelle's first victory was that modest contract, just enough to pay for milk and diapers. She soon discovered that her teaching background gave her a surprising advantage. In her years of teaching literature, she learned how to listen, understand the needs of students and parents, and adapt to gain trust. She applied that skill to her new business, talking to clients to understand their needs, from using hypoallergenic products for medical offices to scheduling around operating hours. You work like you own the entire building, one client remarked after Michelle meticulously cleaned a carpet stain other services had ignored. To build a team, Michelle returned to the shelter, where she found women who shared her circumstances. She hired Tanya, a black mother and survivor of domestic abuse, and Maria, a Mexican immigrant struggling to raise 2 children. Michelle said during their first team meeting in the shelter's standard room, I need reliable and detail-oriented people. Hours won't always be consistent, but I understand when kids are sick or sitters cancel. Tanya, eyes sparkling with hope, asked, Can we do this? Michelle nodded. I do because I was in your place once too. Michelle and her small team cleaned offices, from law firms to small clinics each evening. Olivia slept in a laundry basket, lined with blankets in a quiet corner of the workspace. Michelle worked with laser focus to earn money and prove she could defy society's judgments. Once, while cleaning windows at a financial firm, she overheard an employee whisper to a coworker, She's good at what she does, but who puts a single black mother in charge of an office like this? Michelle pretended not to hear, but she remembered every word, turning them into fuel to work harder. After 3 weeks, her time at the shelter ran out. With the money from her first contracts, Michelle rented a small studio apartment in Dorchester, its walls stained and heating unreliable. On the first night in their new home, she laid Olivia in a second-hand crib from a charity, looked around the mostly empty room, just a mattress on the floor and a folding table, and whispered, This is just temporary. I'm going to build something extraordinary. She opened her future notebook and logged that week's income, $312. Not much, but enough to spark hope. Every business card Michelle handed out was a reminder of her vow in the shelter. She wasn't just cleaning offices. She was scrubbing away the past, building a future James could never have imagined. Every skeptical glance, every whisper laced with prejudice, only strengthened her resolve. Carter Cleaning Services wasn't just a company. It was living proof that Michelle Carter, the woman once dismissed as ordinary, could make a difference. The flickering fluorescent light buzzed inside a small office in Dorchester, where Michelle Carter sat surrounded by stacks of invoices and cleaning contracts for Carter Cleaning Services. On the floor, nestled in a corner lined with a blanket, 3-year-old Olivia, with curly hair like her mother's, was intently stacking wooden blocks into a complex tower. Her wide eyes sparkled with focus, as if she were solving a problem rather than playing. It had been 3 years since Michelle wagered her last $50 to print business cards, turning a vow made in a shelter into a small but stable enterprise. Yet every night, once Olivia had drifted off to sleep, Michelle still felt the shadow of the past, the cruel words of James Whitmore, telling her she would never be anything, and the ever-present worry about her daughter's future in a world full of prejudice. Olivia had grown up amid late-night cleaning shifts and rushed early mornings. She didn't have expensive toys or new clothes, but she possessed a mind far beyond her years. By age 2, she recognized letters from the scattered business cards on their dinner table. By 3, she had taught herself to read using old children's books Michelle had picked up at flea markets. "Mama, how do you spell butterfly?" Olivia asked one evening, clutching a worn book. Michelle, who was calculating cleaning supply costs at the kitchen table, looked up and was surprised. "You can read that word?" Olivia nodded and pointed. "I like it. It flies." Michelle realized Olivia wasn't just bright. She was a prodigy. However, her brilliance came with a sensitivity that left Michelle proud and concerned. Olivia often watched her mother work, her round eyes absorbing every detail. One evening, after a grueling cleaning shift, Michelle returned with hands raw from chemicals. Olivia ran to her, hugging her leg. "Mommy, are you tired?" "I can help you clean the table," she said, mimicking her mother's motions with a small cloth, her expression etched with worry. Michelle knelt and pulled her into a hug. "I'm okay, baby. Mommy works so we can have a better future." But even at that age, Olivia sensed something missing. One afternoon at the playground near their rundown apartment complex, she watched a father push his child on a swing. She then turned to Michelle, who sat nearby with her future notebook. "Mommy, why is it just the two of us?" Olivia asked, her voice innocent yet piercing. Michelle felt her heart tighten. She had rehearsed for this question, but it still hit like a knife. She replied, "Because you and I, we're the strongest team," forcing a smile. "We're enough to do anything." Olivia nodded, but her eyes held uncertainty. Michelle knew that someday she would have to tell the truth about James, the father who had abandoned them before Olivia was born. Society didn't make things easier. As a single black mother in Dorchester, Michelle constantly faced judgment. Teachers often looked at her with pity and doubt at public preschools where she enrolled Olivia. "Are you raising her alone? Where's the father?" one teacher asked, more curious than concerned. Michelle gave her practiced, polite smile and repeated the same lie. "He passed away before Olivia was born." It shielded her from judgment, but she also felt like she was hiding a part of herself. Olivia, even at 3, began to notice the difference. One day at the grocery store, as Michelle stood in line with food stamps, a white woman behind them muttered, "Another single mom living off welfare." Holding a box of cereal, Olivia turned and stared at the woman with a look so sharp it silenced her. Later, on the bus ride home, she asked, "Mommy, why did that lady say that? You work so much." Michelle pulled her close, her voice calm but firm. "Some people don't understand us, baby, but I'll show them they're wrong." Olivia's intellect continued to blossom. By age 4, she was solving simple math problems Michelle wrote on scraps of paper to keep her occupied while she worked. One night, while Michelle reviewed a contract at a law office, Olivia looked up from her math book and said, "Mommy, 7 plus 5 is 12, right?" Michelle, wiping a desk, stopped and stared. "Yes, baby. Who taught you that?" Olivia shrugged. "I figured it out." At that moment, Michelle realized Olivia didn't just need shelter. She needed an environment that could nurture her extraordinary gifts. But raising a prodigy under difficult circumstances was no easy feat. Michelle worked 16-hour days, sharing a drafty studio apartment with Olivia, where the heat often broke. She saved every cent to buy books and educational toys, but the weight of social suspicion was constant. Once, at the public library, a staff member noticed Olivia reading a book meant for older children. "She's smart," the woman said, then added, "But be careful. Don't let her be too different." Michelle smiled politely. But inside, she vowed never to let the world suppress her daughter's light. The absence of a father became more apparent for Olivia. One night, while Michelle bathed her, Olivia looked up with solemn eyes. "Mommy, everyone has a daddy. Where's mine?" Michelle felt like she couldn't breathe. She sat beside the tub and held her daughter's hand. "Your daddy couldn't be with us," she said carefully, "but I love you enough for both of us." Olivia nodded, but Michelle saw it in her eyes. The question had taken root. It would wait silently until, one day, it demanded answers. Michelle knew that the truth about James, the man who had abandoned them with $2,000 and the claim she was ordinary, would eventually reach Olivia. Her daughter was too bright to accept vague explanations forever. But for now, Michelle focused on growing Carter cleaning services, not just to feed and clothe Olivia, but to create a future where her daughter could thrive, unhindered by prejudice. Every new contract and every satisfied client was a brick in the foundation of that dream. With her intellect and sensitivity, Olivia was the light that guided Michelle's path. But she was also a reminder that the past, and the secret of James Whitmore, could not stay buried forever. One day, Olivia would learn the truth, and when that day came, their entire world might change. In the tiny studio apartment in Dorchester, light from an old desk lamp spilled across a table covered in paperwork. Michelle Carter, her eyes weary but burning with determination, was jotting notes into her future notebook, a habit she'd maintained since her earliest days in Boston. Beside her, Olivia, now 5 years old, sat on the floor, flipping through pages of a math book meant for much older children, muttering numbers under her breath as if solving a riddle. It had been 5 years since Michelle wagered her last $50 to print business cards for Carter Cleaning Services, turning a vow made in a shelter into a small but stable business with 12 regular contracts. But Michelle knew that to change her life truly, and Olivia's, she had to think bigger than the modest offices she cleaned each night. Though Carter Cleaning Services was successful, it had reached its ceiling. The income covered rent, books for Olivia, and wages for 3 employees, all black women or single mothers like Michelle. But it wasn't enough to create a real breakthrough. While satisfied with her services, Michelle realized that law firms and dental clinics didn't pay enough to build an empire. She needed a niche, a service no one else was offering. The idea came one April night as she cleaned a small biotech firm called Biotech Solutions after a celebration event. While scrubbing champagne stains from the carpet, Michelle noticed sensitive lab equipment in the adjacent room. A technician warned nervously, "Don't use any strong chemicals near that machine. The last crew ruined a $20,000 sensor." Michelle nodded, taking mental note. After her shift, she stayed behind and borrowed the office computer to research cleaning standards in high-tech environments. She discovered that labs and data centers required specialized cleaning services, ones that didn't risk contaminating equipment, a need most cleaning companies overlooked. That night, Michelle returned home, her mind racing. She opened her future notebook and wrote, "Specialized cleaning for high-tech environments, labs and data centers." But to make that idea real, she needed knowledge. Michelle enrolled in a night course on facility management at a local community center, squeezing it into a packed schedule of substitute teaching, cleaning, and parenting Olivia. "Can you handle all this?" The instructor, a retired facilities manager, asked as Michelle walked in with dark circles under her eyes. "I don't have a choice," she replied, her voice steady. Each night, after Olivia fell asleep, Michelle studied until 2 a.m., taking notes on ventilation systems, dust particle control, and anti-static cleaning chemicals. Her real chance came when she heard about an incident at MIT where a cleaning service had destroyed research data using improper chemicals. Michelle spent an entire weekend drafting a detailed proposal for the Carter Tech Clean Division, a specialized branch offering lab-grade cleaning solutions. She printed a polished presentation using all her savings and asked one of her current clients to connect her with MIT's facility manager. Tanya, her first employee. "You're taking a significant risk," remarked. "You were taking a considerable risk," when she saw Michelle working non-stop. "Risk is the only way forward," Michelle replied, her eyes glowing. The meeting at MIT was the biggest challenge Michelle had faced. In a conference room lined with portraits of famous scientists, she stood before a panel of managers, mostly white, mostly male, with a calm forged through years of struggle. "Gentlemen, the recent incident highlights a gap in the cleaning industry," she began, her voice clear. "Carter Cleaning Services can fill that gap with a team trained in lab protocols, using non-reactive chemicals and anti-static tools." She laid out procedures for dust particle checks, disruption-free cleaning schedules, and safety practices. The managers, skeptical at first, grew visibly intrigued. "Can you demonstrate this in practice?" one manager asked, still doubtful. Michelle smiled and pulled a pair of gloves and a specialized cleaning kit from her bag. In 15 minutes, she cleaned a corner of the server room, explaining every step. "This microfiber cloth removes dust without generating static. Our solution fully evaporates and leaves no residue." The silence in the room was her answer. 3 days later, Carter Cleaning Services signed a contract with MIT, the largest in the company's history, opening doors to other research institutes across Boston. With the MIT contract, Michelle rebranded the business as Carter Enterprises, evolving from standard cleaning to specialized facility management. She expanded her team, prioritizing hiring Black women and single mothers from shelters, creating a company culture rooted in empathy and support. "We're not just cleaning," she told her team during a meeting at the apartment. "We're providing peace of mind to people, changing the world." Tanya, now a team lead, smiled. "You make me believe we can do anything." But success didn't come without resistance. Michelle faced skepticism from suppliers and new clients who questioned whether a Black woman could lead a company serving elite institutions. Every new contract was a battle. But Michelle drew on her teaching skills, listening, analyzing, persuading, to turn doubt into trust. She thought of Olivia, growing up with exceptional intelligence, and of the vow she had made in the shelter. "One day, James will swallow every word he ever said." Carter Enterprises wasn't just her dream. It was her daughter's legacy and her answer to every prejudice that had tried to hold them back. In the small bedroom of their Dorchester apartment, the light from a cheap desk lamp spilled across a study table cluttered with books and scratch paper. Olivia Carter, now 12, sat in front of an old laptop, her sharp eyes scanning a DNA test result on the screen. With curly hair like her mother's and the focused gaze of a young scientist, she had just confirmed a truth that would change everything. James Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, was her biological father. This moment, months in the making and planned in secret, was not just a revelation. It was a fracture in the wall Michelle Carter had built to protect her daughter from a painful past. Olivia had always known she was different. Since the age of 3, she had taught herself to read using her mother's business cards. And by 5, she was solving math problems that stunned even her kindergarten teachers. But her exceptional intellect came with a deep emotional sensitivity. She grew up in the middle of her mother's late-night cleaning shifts, in a drafty apartment with broken heating, and under the suspicious gaze of a society that often looked down on single Black mothers. Olivia never forgot the question she asked Michelle at the playground when she was 3. "Why is it just the two of us?" Michelle's vague response, that her father couldn't be with us, only made Olivia more curious. Now, at 12, she had decided to find the answer herself. It began on a crisp autumn afternoon when Olivia was rummaging through her mother's closet for a winter coat. She found an old wooden hairbrush engraved with the initials JW in a dusty shoebox. The brush stood out. It was masculine in design and carried a few strands of graying hair. Olivia's analytical mind instantly connected JW with fragmented memories. Her mother's silence when asked about her father, and the flicker of sorrow in Michelle's eyes whenever family was mentioned. Carefully, she placed one of the hairs into a plastic bag and began her plan. Olivia had read about DNA testing in a science book borrowed from the public library. With money saved from tutoring classmates in math, she secretly sent the hair sample and her saliva to a private lab. The lab tech told her the results would take 8 weeks over the phone. Olivia nodded, heart pounding. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, where the truth could hurt the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her. For the next 8 weeks, Olivia maintained the perfect secret. She went to school, won first place in the state math competition, and continued helping her mother review Carter Enterprises contracts. The company Michelle had transformed from a one-woman cleaning service into a facility management business serving MIT and other major research institutions. However, once Michelle was asleep each night, Olivia opened her laptop and read articles about James Whitmore, the man who graced business magazines with a confident smile and tailored suits. She took notes. CEO of Whitmore Industries, age 42. I moved from Chicago to New York in 2005. The timeline matched her mother's story. Olivia felt a rising wave of emotions, curiosity, anger, and a quiet ache she couldn't yet name. The DNA results arrived on a winter evening while Michelle was in a staff meeting at Carter Enterprises' new office. Olivia opened the email from the lab, her heart racing as she read the line. Paternity match, 99.997%. James Whitmore was her father. She sat motionless, eyes fixed on the screen, struggling to absorb the truth. Part of her wanted to run to her mother and demand answers. But another part, deeper and more fragile, felt wounded. This man, who built a billion-dollar empire, had chosen to walk away from her and her mother. Why? Olivia whispered, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She wiped them away, refusing to let emotion overtake logic. She printed the results, placed them in a sealed envelope, and hid them in the desk drawer beside her math medals. She knew she wasn't ready to confront James or tell Michelle. Her mother had done everything to protect her, and Olivia didn't want to cause her pain. Still, she began researching James more deeply, reading every article, saving photos, and storing everything in a hidden laptop folder titled Chicago. She realized she hadn't only inherited her mother's brilliance, she also carried a sharp, calculating side. Perhaps that came from the father she'd never met. The social context made Olivia's pain more complex. As a black girl growing up in Dorchester, she was used to the judgmental stares and whispered comments about her mother. Another single mom on welfare, despite Michelle working nonstop. At a math competition, a white parent whispered to another, "That girl's smart but probably just got in on a scholarship." Standing nearby, Olivia clutched her medal tighter, eyes blazing with defiance. She knew she had to prove her worth, not just for herself, but for her mother, who had turned prejudice into purpose by building Carter Enterprises. Despite how well the girl masked it, Michelle sensed a shift in Olivia. One evening, over a simple pasta dinner, Michelle saved every penny to buy new books, and Olivia was quieter than usual. "You okay, Olivia?" Michelle asked, setting down her fork. Olivia nodded, her gaze turning away. "I'm just thinking about the future. I want to make you proud." Michelle smiled, holding her daughter's hand. You make me proud every single day. But inside, she worried. Olivia was too bright and too perceptive, and Michelle feared the day her daughter would dig into the past she had tried so hard to bury. With the DNA results hidden in her drawer, Olivia knew that day wasn't far off. She didn't want to face James out of anger or revenge. She tried to understand why he left them and whether he had ever regretted it. The DNA result was a piece on a chessboard she had just begun to play, a game requiring patience and strategy. She would wait for the right moment, when truth could deliver clarity and justice, not just for her, but for her mother, the woman who had turned $2,000 and a one-way plane ticket into an empire. Morning sunlight streamed through the large glass window of Carter Enterprises' modest but tidy office in the basement of a commercial building near Boston Harbor. Wearing a sharp navy suit, Michelle Carter stood before a screen displaying the company's operational map, each blinking dot representing one of the 15 states where Carter Enterprises provided facility management services. 10 years after arriving in Boston with $2,000 and a one-way ticket from James Whitmore, Michelle had turned her shelter vow into a $200 million empire. But today, an even greater opportunity awaited her, one bearing the name Whitmore Industries, the very company of the ex-husband who once scorned her. The idea to acquire Whitmore Industries came from Mariana Lopez, Carter Enterprises' head of M&A. Mariana placed a thick dossier on Michelle's desk in a morning meeting. Whitmore Industries is in trouble, she announced, excitement in her voice. Their online media platform failed, and their stock has dropped 23% in 6 months. The board is losing confidence in James Whitmore. Michelle skimmed the numbers, her gaze steady though her heart raced. This wasn't merely a deal. It was the intersection of past and present, a chance to prove she had outgrown James's curse. You'll never be anything without me. However, taking over a conglomerate like Whitmore Industries would not be easy. Major shareholders were wary and concerned about financial stability. James's lawyers, a top New York firm, had erected a labyrinth of legal barriers, from public disclosure requirements for any buyer to clauses protecting the current board's control. Michelle knew that to succeed, they had to conceal Carter Enterprises' identity until the final moment. She instructed Mariana to use Carter Holdings, our subsidiary, to buy shares through pension funds and international investment firms. Each transaction must be small enough to avoid notice. Mariana nodded, but couldn't hide her anxiety. They'll do everything to stop it if they discover it's you. Michelle understood the stakes. A $320 million acquisition demanded absolute precision and massive capital. She had to persuade banks that once rejected her, an uncollateralized single black mother 10 years ago. This time, backed by the MIT contract and Carter Enterprises' reputation, she secured a loan, albeit at high interest. One bank director commented that you're making a big gamble, eyes still tinged with doubt. Michelle smiled. I already bet my whole life on $2,000. This is just the next step. The social context complicated matters further. As a black woman leading the takeover of a powerful white man's corporation, Michelle knew her every move would face double scrutiny. The business press began whispering about the mysterious woman behind Carter Holdings, and some social media voices even called her a puppet of larger investors. Michelle ignored the noise, though it reminded her of those early Boston days when skeptical stares from landlords and clients were routine. Meanwhile, with her extraordinary intellect, 14-year-old Olivia watched her mother closely. She knew about James from the DNA results and articles she'd stored, but had not said a word. One evening, over dinner in their new spacious apartment overlooking the Charles River, Olivia asked, "Mom, if you buy a big company, what happens to the people who used to own it?" Michelle, slicing salad, looked up, surprised. If it's a sound business decision, I'll keep them on if they add value. If not, the market will decide. Olivia nodded, her sharp eyes masking her plan. At the same time, Michelle received an unexpected contract, preparing for James Whitmore's wedding at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York. The New York operations director reports paying triple to ensure perfection. Michelle paused, gripping her pen. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. She decided to oversee the contract personally, not just for the money, but for the chance to face James again. Not for revenge, but to show him what she'd become. Prepare the best team, she ordered, and make sure Olivia is set up for a lab tour at Columbia simultaneously. The takeover of Whitmore Industries proceeded with chess-like precision. Carter Holdings quietly bought shares indirectly, from European pension funds to a Singaporean investment firm. However, legal pressure spiked when James's lawyers spotted irregular transactions. One morning, Michelle received an email from a major Whitmore Industries shareholder demanding a direct meeting to verify the buyer's identity. They suspect manipulation, Mariana warned. Michelle nodded. Postpone the meeting until after the wedding. We need a few more days. The night before her flight to New York, Michelle stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her new Chanel suit, a symbol of her journey from scrubbing offices in a worn uniform. She thought of her shelter vow, of Olivia and James. This is not revenge, she told herself. This is justice. For me, my daughter, and women like us, whom society underestimated but never gave up. She reviewed the takeover documents one last time, ensuring every detail was flawless. Tomorrow, she whispered to her reflection, James will see what he lost. In Olivia's bedroom, the teenager carefully checked the envelope containing her DNA results. She sensed her mother's tension and knew a significant move was underway. Though she hadn't revealed her secret, Olivia resolved to bring the DNA proof to New York. She wasn't certain how she would use it, but she wanted to be ready, to confront the father who had abandoned them, and to stand by the mother who had given everything. The Four Seasons Hotel, New York. The morning of June 23, 2025. Summer sunlight poured through the grand windows of the hotel, illuminating the grand ballroom, the site of what the press had dubbed the event of the year. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above arrangements of imported Dutch white roses. In a navy Chanel suit, Michelle Carter stood behind a massive floral display, directing the Carter Enterprises team with the precision of a general. To the guests and staff, she appeared to be just a poised black woman managing logistics. None of them knew she was not only the CEO of a $200 million facilities empire, but also the abandoned ex-wife of today's groom, James Whitmore. Today, James, a 45-year-old white businessman, was marrying Elizabeth Harrington, heiress of the prestigious Harrington family. This wedding was the peak of his social ambition, a statement of power among Manhattan's elite. But Michelle hadn't come to sabotage. She was here to fulfill a contract, triple the standard fee, and to face James not as a victim, but as a victor. 15 years ago, he had handed her $2,000 and a one-way ticket, telling her she was too ordinary for his empire. Now, she controlled 51% of Whitmore Industries, the company he had built. Michelle surveyed her team, mostly black women and single mothers, working in unison, scrubbing every detail until perfection shone. Mrs. Carter, the VIP tables are ready, reported Maya, a young staff member. Michelle nodded, her eyes scanning the room, and pausing when James entered. He was tall, with silvered hair and cold blue eyes, instructing photographers about angles. Beside him stood Elizabeth, radiant and haughty, adjusting a silver candle's placement. Michelle clenched her fist briefly, not in fear, but as muscle memory against betrayal. Suddenly, the ballroom doors opened, and in walked 14-year-old Olivia, tablet in hand. Michelle's heart tightened. Olivia was supposed to be at Columbia's research labs, not here. With her mother's curls and her father's sharp eyes, the girl walked directly to Michelle. "Mom," she said calmly but firmly, "I accessed the hotel's server and found a Chicago folder on the groom's laptop. It contains photos of you from 15 years ago." The room held its breath. James turned. His eyes locked on Michelle, then on Olivia. Recognition struck like thunder. He froze, hands trembling. "Michelle?" he stammered, voice cracking. Michelle stepped out from behind the flowers, calm as a boardroom CEO. "Mr. Whitmore," she said evenly, "Carter Enterprises is here to ensure your special day goes flawlessly." James backed away, eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you work for a cleaning company?" he asked, voice wavering. Michelle offered a subtle smile. "I'm the founder and CEO of Carter Enterprises. Perhaps I should thank you for the motivation 15 years ago." Before James could respond, Olivia raised the tablet. "Mr. Whitmore, I had a DNA test 3 years ago confirming with 99.9997% certainty that you are my biological father." Silence fell. Staff murmured in the background. Elizabeth, sensing the tension, approached, brow furrowed. "James, what's going on? Who are they?" Michelle met Elizabeth's gaze squarely. "Ms. Harrington, I'm Michelle Carter, and this is Olivia, James Whitmore's daughter." Elizabeth turned to James, her expression sharp. "What is she talking about?" James stammered, reaching for denial. This is some stunt. I don't know them." But Olivia didn't flinch. "You left my mother when she was pregnant," she said coolly. "You said I would ruin your career. Would you like to see the DNA document?" Elizabeth, pale, removed her diamond ring and placed it in James's hand. "Call it off," she said with cold finality, then walked away. Her influential parents followed in stunned silence. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Flashbulbs flickered outside. Michelle remained composed, accepting an envelope from the hotel manager. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, handing it over, "you may want to read this." James opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was documentation confirming Carter Holdings had acquired 51% of Whitmore Industries. "You bought my company?" he whispered, eyes dazed. Michelle nodded. "Ironic. You said I'd never be anything. Turns out you're the one who lost everything." Olivia stood beside her mother, observing James not with rage, but with the quiet curiosity of a scientist watching a failed experiment. She felt a wave of emotion, pain from abandonment, but pride in her mother's triumph. Michelle took her daughter's hand, voice gentle. "We're done here, Olivia." The two walked out of the ballroom, leaving James standing amid the ruins of his ambition. The social context sharpened the moment. A black woman had just unseated a powerful white executive at his wedding in front of the Manhattan elite. Already on standby, reporters began snapping photos and recording audio, sensing a scandal that would shake corporate circles. But Michelle didn't care for judgmental stares. She had lived among them since her first day in Boston. All she wanted now was for Olivia to know. Prejudice may be substantial, but it cannot stop those who dare to rise. The morning of June 24th, 2025. A pale stream of sunlight slipped through the breakfast lounge windows of the Four Seasons Hotel, where Michelle Carter sat quietly with a cup of coffee, scrolling through headlines on her tablet. Billionaire wedding canceled over secret love child. Whitmore Industries CEO loses control in corporate shakeup. Each headline screamed across the screen, accompanied by a photo of Elizabeth Harrington storming out of the ballroom, her expression carved in ice. Michelle, dressed in a graceful gray business dress, didn't feel triumphant. The confrontation with James Whitmore, the ex-husband who abandoned her and Olivia 15 years ago, was justice. But it had also reopened old scars. She sipped her coffee, her eyes drifting toward Olivia, who sat across from her, scribbling complex equations into the margins of a notebook, her face calm as though the scandal were just another solved problem. The aftermath spread like wildfire. Through a family spokesperson, Elizabeth Harrington announced the wedding was off and asked for privacy. Tabloids speculated about James's betrayal, while business journals focused on the collapse of Whitmore Industries. The board, already frustrated by James's recent decisions, called an emergency meeting. A leaked memo revealed a vote of no confidence, effectively demoting James to the role of strategic advisor, a polite term for exile from power. Whitmore Industries stock fell another 8% in a single day. James, once the embodiment of ambition, was now a man undone. In his Manhattan penthouse, he sat alone, whiskey glass in hand, staring out over the New York skyline, the city he once dreamed of conquering. The memories of yesterday haunted him. Michelle's unflinching gaze as she revealed the corporate takeover, Olivia's sharp voice announcing the DNA results, and the cool weight of Elizabeth's diamond ring as she placed it back in his hand. For the first time in 15 years, James thought of Michelle not as baggage he had left behind, but as a woman who had defied every limit he once set for her. And Olivia, the girl with eyes like his, stood as living proof of his greatest mistake. James hadn't always been heartless. In the early years of building Whitmore Industries, there were moments when he thought of Michelle and the unborn child. Once, drunk after a successful deal, he'd searched her name online, but found nothing beyond a small article about a schoolteacher in Chicago. He convinced himself she had disappeared, and that abandoning her had been the right call. Ambition had clouded all remorse. He dove into empire building, hobnobbing with the elite, and proposed to Elizabeth to seal his social ascent. But now, as everything unraveled, James realized his empire was hollow. "What did I trade it all for?" he murmured, staring into the golden swirl of whiskey. The decision to seek out Michelle and Olivia came from a rare impulse: guilt. That morning, he returned to the lobby of the Four Seasons, suit rumpled, hair disheveled, and waited 45 minutes to ask for a meeting. When Michelle and Olivia descended the elevator, he stood up, voice shaking. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, glancing at Olivia, recognizing his features in her. Olivia, tablet in hand, replied coolly, 15 minutes, Mr. Whitmore. I have a Columbia lab session at 11. Her bluntness made him flinch. "I thought all night," James began, his voice hoarse. I didn't think she was pregnant, or that you, would become this." Olivia interrupted, her voice sharp. "You knew. You left my mom in Chicago with $2,000. That's a fact, not a hypothesis." James bowed his head, admitting it for the first time. "I was wrong. I was young, ambitious, and afraid of responsibility. I want to make it right, for both of you." Michelle, silent until now, finally spoke. "James, no amount of making it right will erase 15 years. I don't need your money or apologies. I built this life, for me and Olivia, without you." James looked at her, eyes filled with regret. "You hate me, don't you?" Michelle offered a soft smile, not of bitterness, but of peace. "I don't hate you, James. I moved beyond you long ago when I decided your words wouldn't define my worth." Olivia studied her father with the cool detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't need a father who shows up because I'm gifted or because my mom bought your company. A father stays, even when it's hard. You didn't." She stood, voice measured. "My 15 minutes are up." As Olivia walked away, James turned to Michelle, desperation clinging to his voice. "What will you do with the company? Fire me? Burn it down?" Michelle replied calmly, "This is business, James. Not personal. Your position will depend on the board and your capability." The social context made the fallout even sharper. This wasn't just a personal drama. It was the story of a black woman who rose above systemic prejudice to dethrone a powerful white man in public. Though the media praised Michelle, some commentary remained poisoned, suggesting she was lucky or backed by shadow investors. Michelle ignored them. She focused on integrating Whitmore's tech into Carter Enterprises, ensuring the acquisition created real value. In the following weeks, James drifted into his new diminished role, attending strategy meetings but feeling invisible. One day, he came across an article about Olivia winning a full scholarship to MIT at just 14. He realized the girl had inherited his eyes and Michelle's tenacity, something he had never possessed. He tried writing a letter to Olivia, then tore it up, realizing that no apology on paper could suffice. Michelle, meanwhile, declined all interview requests. She didn't want to turn the ordeal into a drawn-out media circus. She knew the world would always filter her through the lens of race and gender. But she didn't need their validation. She only needed Olivia, and a future where the past bound neither of them. The Boston sky glowed with sunset hues, casting golden light over the Charles River as Michelle Carter and Olivia stepped out of a cozy restaurant in Back Bay. The two had just celebrated Olivia's full-ride scholarship to MIT, making her the youngest student accepted into the physics program at age 14. Michelle, wrapped in a soft blue sweater, held her daughter's hand and felt a deep peace, something she hadn't known 15 years ago when James Whitmore left her with $2,000 and the cold words, "You'll never be anything." Standing in the city that had witnessed both her lowest and highest moments, Michelle knew she hadn't just survived. She had built a legacy. 6 months earlier, the confrontation at the Four Seasons had become a cultural moment, not because of James's downfall, but because it marked Michelle's final liberation. The media turned her story into a phenomenon. From abandoned single mother to facilities queen, read one Boston Globe headline beneath a photo of Michelle cutting the ribbon at the new Carter Enterprises headquarters, 3 glass-clad floors overlooking Boston Harbor. But Michelle declined most interviews. She didn't want her journey reduced to media theater. "I didn't do this to prove anyone wrong," she told a rare reporter. "I did it to prove myself right." Carter Enterprises continued its rapid growth, integrating technology from Whitmore Industries and expanding services into hospitals and government institutions. In the first quarter post-acquisition, company stock rose 17%, evidence that Michelle's move was strategic, not spiteful. She maintained her hiring policy, prioritizing black women and single mothers, fostering a company culture rooted in empathy and shared struggle. "You changed our lives," said Tanya, her first employee, during a team gathering, her voice thick with emotion. Michelle smiled. "We changed each other's." With her exceptional intellect and early maturity, Olivia leveraged media attention to push her academic goals. She negotiated with MIT for greater lab access and research grants, impressing even the program director. "She's not just brilliant," he told Michelle. "She's resilient in a way I rarely see." Michelle nodded, knowing that resilience was forged not in classrooms, but in cold Dorchester nights and in the judging eyes that followed a black girl growing up without a father. The social context remained a challenge. Praise came, but so did venom. Online trolls called their success luck or media hype. During a Harvard Business School guest lecture, one audience member asked, "How did a woman like you, without pedigree or connections, acquire a major corporation?" Michelle smiled calmly. "I didn't have a pedigree. I had determination. And that's something no one can take from you." The room erupted in applause. But Michelle knew prejudice wouldn't disappear. It simply sharpened her edge. James Whitmore, meanwhile, continued to spiral through the fallout. His role as a strategic advisor at Whitmore Industries was a shell of the authority he once held. He lived more reclusively now, avoiding the press, though he couldn't escape thoughts of Michelle and Olivia. One evening, at a high-end restaurant in Boston, he spotted Michelle arriving with business partners. He sat alone at the bar, hair grayer, suit loose from weight loss. After hesitation, he stood and approached her table. "Michelle," he said, voice raspy. She looked up, serene. "James." He took a breath. "I heard about Olivia. MIT, the scholarship. She's extraordinary." Michelle nodded, saying nothing. James's voice faltered. "I was wrong, Michelle. I traded everything to build an empire. But now I see it was nothing. Do you think Olivia might forgive me?" Michelle met his gaze. There was no anger, only clarity. "Forgiveness isn't something you're owed, James. It's a gift, one only she can give. Olivia has chosen a life that doesn't require you to be in it." James bowed his head, pain written on his face. "What about you? Can you forgive me?" Michelle offered a soft smile, the kind only true freedom can create. "James, I don't need to forgive you. I was already free when I decided your words wouldn't define me. You're not part of my story anymore." She rose to greet her partners, leaving James at the table, facing the emptiness of the choices he once made. Outside on the sidewalk, Olivia was waiting, holding a handmade solar system model for an upcoming science fair. "Ready for the weekend at Cape Cod, Mom?" She beamed. Michelle wrapped her arms around her, feeling the purity of joy. "Ready, my love. The whole world's ahead of us." The two walked off together, Boston's golden sunset lighting their path, as if the city was celebrating their journey. Michelle didn't look back. She didn't need to. James's judgmental stares or societal bias no longer defined her story. It was defined by her love for Olivia, the grit that turned $2,000 into an empire, and the belief that a person's worth is built, not by what they lose, but by what they create. With Olivia by her side, Michelle entered a future where every dream was within reach.